July 30th, 2016. Police in Mukilteo, Washington receive multiple 911 calls reporting gunfire at a house party.
We got a call that there were shots fired. Me and the sergeant, we just jumped in his car and we started driving down the road.
I'd never seen so many calls on my computer before. This has got to be legitimate.
Patrol officers arrive and discover a scene of devastation.
There had been a mass shooting. There were multiple casualties, and one person was on the way to Harborview Medical Center.
The officers immediately call for backup.
These things don't happen in Mukilteo. They're not used to being subjected to this type of trauma.
The shooter flees the scene as investigators try to establish a motive behind the senseless and violent attack.
They all knew each other. They were all part of the same friend group.
These kids are innocent. They were good kids.
They soon learn that one of the victims, 19-year-old Anna Bowie, was being stalked by a jealous ex-boyfriend.
He wanted his girlfriend back, and it sounds like she maybe didn't want him back.
He didn't think it was fair to him that she would move on with her life, even though he was the one that broke up with her. If I can't have her, then nobody can have her.
This is the tragic story of how a close group of friends fell victim to the anger and resentment of one green-eyed killer.
This was what his goal was, and he was going to follow through.
The city of Mukilteo in Snohomish County, Washington, is located 25 miles north of Seattle.
Mukilteo is a bedroom community for the most part. A lot of people who live here commute to places like Seattle. There's a Boeing plant just outside of the city.
6.5 square miles, one high school, very close-knit community. Everyone pretty much knows what goes on.
It's fairly safe. We have mostly property crimes for the most part. I mean, we do have our occasional personal crimes, but majority of it's property crimes.
On the evening of Friday, July 29th, 2016, police officers from Mukilteo Police Department begin their shift, patrolling the quiet streets of their city.
Started out as a normal shift. I logged in 6 o'clock. We were just out moving about the city, seeing what was going on.
For the most part, the day looks like responding to 911 calls and making traffic stops.
In another part of the city, a group of high school friends gather at a house for a party to celebrate the end of their first year in college. But as they are enjoying the night, little do they realize they are being observed and stalked by a dangerous young man who has recently purchased a semi-automatic rifle and 40 rounds of ammunition.
He had purchased the AR-15 prior to the party, so he must have known that there was a party going to take place or a gathering at a specific location.
Shortly after midnight, multiple 911 calls begin lighting up the switchboard of Mukilteo Police Department.
A lot of times you get calls about shots fired in the city, and they're either fireworks complaints or something like cars backfiring, so you usually get like one caller sometimes on those.
I was working the computer while my sergeant at the time, Colt Davis, was driving, and I was reading off the call list to him. I couldn't read the computer fast enough to read every single line.
Officer Dodds was reading the calls off the screen, the notes of the narrative, saying that a couple kids were hurt, and there's multiple callers coming about the situation, and that this probably shooter may have left the scene. And so we were all driving with the lights and sirens to the call.
The responding officers arrive at the scene of the gunfire, unsure of what they will find.
We pulled in our normal, safety spot where you pull in. I remember getting out and getting my rifle. At the time, I didn't know anything other than there's people that were shot, there's people that were down. In my head, I'm trying to think of what I should be doing and how we should approach it, just like the sergeant at the time was trying to pre-plan what we were going to do.
So I walked out to the street a little bit to see if I can see anything, and the only thing I saw was just a baseball cap, like literally sitting in the middle of the street. And I was like, this is so weird, because you think, again, the amount of callers we had, something would be happening down here.
When we get there, nobody's there. And this is the time that officers around the country are being ambushed. And I was thinking, are we being set up? Is there something that I'm not seeing?
As I kind of circled out to the house. The garage door was open, but it started closing. And I was like, this is weird because like kids are asking for help. We're here on scene. The doors are open. Why are they shutting all of a sudden?
The officers need to find out what is going on inside the property they have been called to.
And then we started hearing yelling from a roof above us.
We started walking closer to the house that we saw kids start screaming at us from the top of this house. Like, just like, hey, help us, and screaming at us and trying to get our attention.
We're now having communication with the people above us. They're yelling that their friends have been shot. And when we ask them questions, where? They couldn't give us answers to our questions.
They shout out instructions to the young people who have taken shelter on the roof to remain where they are.
So we fell back behind like this rock shrubbery area, and it was again me, Officer Dodds, and the trooper. I was like, hey guys, we gotta move forward because we know what's happening here, we gotta move forward. You guys get behind me, I'll be in front. We're gonna circle to the side of the garage, and we'll circle around the house and see if we see anything.
We were gonna go up the driveway because it was kind of a steep driveway. We were gonna go around the house and check the back side of the house and see if we couldn't kind of figure out what was going on.
I remember getting to the back and saw my first window in the back of the house, and I saw kids like kind of moving around, but they're kind of crouched down in there. And I was like, this is weird. This is a weird call.
On that side of the house, they had an eave on the very top of the house, all windows covering, fire pit, just an area where people could gather. But there was broken glass from that ceiling area. And that's when me and the sergeant kind of looked at each other. We kind of knew, okay, that's not normal. And as we were approaching the front of the house on the first corner, we came across our first down individual.
The young man lying face down on the lawn is 19-year-old Jacob Long. He has received multiple gunshot wounds and is unresponsive.
You turn him over and it's just not expecting to see someone like that. So that's when it was like, this is like a real situation that's going on. We made radio for notifications on the radio that, hey, we have at least one person down right now.
Now we have one that's not breathing, but we need to continue moving because we don't know now where the shooter's at. So we're trying to focus on what can we do to find more information.
And we walked closer to the front door. And as we reached the front door, the door was open. One kid was holding his friend who had been shot several times.
It was at that time that we found Jordan Ebner, obviously deceased, in the entryway.
19-year-old Jordan Ebner from nearby Lake Stevens was attending the party at his friend's house on the night of the attack.
Before I got promoted, I was a crime prevention officer. So I went to a lot of schools in Mukilteo. I went to lunches and hung out with kids and stuff. This guy noticed me. He's like, oh my God, Officer Davis, thank God you're here. Because he recognized who I was. And he went to get up. And my police brain's like, don't move. Right? Because I don't know what's happening. Like, don't move. I don't know what's going on. Stay where you're at.
The police officers need to bring the situation under control without any further loss of life.
We knew that we had help coming, but we knew we couldn't wait for that help. The best thing that we could think of was we got to get these people off the roof to us. And then at that point, we can go in and search to see who's in the house.
I made the decision to leave Officer Dodds and the trooper at the front door until more units arrived. And I went back down the driveway, kind of coordinate a response to this situation.
We called each kid down one by one and brought them to us. Me and the trooper were at the top of the stairs, and Colt was down at the bottom of the driveway.
Officer Dodds and the trooper started calling people out of the house, and they would, hey, just go around the hill, you see an officer.
Each kid came down, 8 kids, 9 kids, one by one came to us. Sergeant Davis just took the first house that opened up a door. That's where we put the kids.
These people across the street were amazing. I commandeered their house. I was like, everyone's going inside your house. Didn't even think to even ask them, just kind of directed them to, and they just accepted everybody willingly.
They were together, but they were now safe. Now we had to game plan what our next step was because we still didn't have anybody else to come help us. And we decided that we were going to wait for additional units to arrive so we could make sure that if the shooter was still in the house, we were safe.
I called my chief, I called my assistant chief, I called our PIO, no one was answering the phone. I was like, I am just lost for space right now.
I got a phone call at home from then Sergeant Colt Davis, now Assistant Chief Colt Davis, and he quickly explained to me what had gone on.
He immediately was like, okay, Colt, don't worry about it. I'll call people in for you. I'm on my way to assist you. And I was like, I just felt better.
Backup now arrives from neighbouring law enforcement agencies to assist the Mukilteo Police Department in securing the scene.
We got some additional units there from surrounding agencies. The surrounding agencies had a bunch of guys on the SWAT team. The best move for us was to allow them to move through the house because they had the technical and the tactical training that we don't have. And we went in and we cleared the house. And when we hit the kitchen, we found Anna Bowie in the dining room area, deceased.
19-year-old Anna Bowie was a first-year student at the University of Washington, Bothell.
She lived in Everett with her parents and her older sister and her brother. They did not know that Anna was at this party because they weren't part of the same text groups.
With the scene now cleared and secure, investigators quickly try to identify the perpetrator of this horrific crime.
We cleared the house. We started searching the neighborhood for any vehicles.
We're trying to identify who knew him, and apparently they all were familiar with each other through high school.
These kids have come back home from college. It was like summertime, so they were having a gathering at their house.
The survivors from the party are questioned by police, and the name of the chief suspect soon emerges.
I sent an officer or two inside the house for witnesses, like, hey guys, any information? I need to know who did this. An officer from Mount Terrace says, okay, cool. Kids are telling me it's this kid, Ivanov.
19-year-old computer science student Alan Ivanov had previously attended Kamiak High School with many of the guests at the party that night.
Anna Bowie had just broken up with Alan Ivanov.
We put out the bolo with the belief that he was the shooter based on what the partygoers said and based on things that he had posted on social media.
The race is now on to apprehend Alan Ivanov before he can kill or injure anyone else. July 30th, 2016. A group of college friends enjoying themselves at a summer house party are attacked by a young man armed with a semi-automatic rifle. Within minutes of the first shots ringing out, 3 young people lose their lives in a shocking display of extreme violence and terror. 2 other partygoers are wounded as the shooter mercilessly hunts down his victims while moving through the house. Only when he has expended all of his ammunition does the killer flee the scene. Mukilteo Police Department respond to multiple 911 calls and rescue the remaining partygoers who have fled upstairs to the roof of the house. They quickly identify the attacker as their former high school classmate, 19-year-old computer student Alan Ivanov.
He was quite brilliant in computers and computer science, a little introverted, but I don't know that anybody foresaw that he would be a mass shooter.
Investigators need to apprehend Ivanov as quickly as possible to prevent any further loss of life.
I decided at that point to ask dispatch to do a trace on his phone and find out where he was going.
We're pinging phones, we're trying to identify where he may be located, and we're putting that information out, and we're tracking the movement on that ping to try to make sure that our law enforcement partners in the area can know how to respond and what to do.
He started heading south on I-5. He started calling family members. He called his aunt. He called his grandmother. In Chehalis, just south of Olympia, which is the state capital, roughly halfway between Seattle and Portland, Oregon, State Patrol found his car, which was a pretty specific white Subaru WRX. They pulled him over. The rifle was sitting on the seat right next to him.
Driver, step out of the car and face away. Do it now. 320. Put your hands up. With your left hand, reach down to your shirt and pull it up so I can see your waistline. Now turn in a circle. Keep going. Keep going. Now put your hands back up and start walking back toward my car. Keep coming.
He didn't resist. He just gave himself up. State Patrol took him into custody.
We were contacted by State Patrol that they had a suspect in custody, and the vehicle matched the description of what we had from the scene from the crime in Mukilteo.
They called a tow truck, and they escorted him and the car back up to Snohomish County, and we took custody.
Come back here so you're still being audio video recorded, okay? No one else in the car?
They did read him his Miranda rights at the scene. He waived his Miranda rights, and then there was Ivanov, and he was mumbling to himself in the back seat about how screwed he was.
God, please forgive me. God, please let me die.
Obviously, the harder part after that was like the victims, the witnesses, doing death notifications with people.
The survivors from the party are still in a deep state of shock as one by one their families arrive to take them home.
We had a large crowd of people at the top of Chenault Beach Road. I had already been given information of who the three were that were deceased. And when I went up there, I'm making a list for who's there to pick up who. And I'll never forget when Jordan Ebner's dad walked up and said that he was there for his son. I stopped before I even wrote the name down because I already knew that his son was deceased. And I can't tell him that. I had to continue focusing on what my job was and keep taking names.
Among the families waiting for news of their loved ones is Jacob Long's mother, Autumn Snyder.
About 3 a.m, I woke up and checked my phone, and I had a missed call, a voicemail from Christina, who at the time was Jake's girlfriend. She just kept saying that Jake was missing, that he had gone into the trees and nobody could find him, and to call her. And she had sent that shortly after midnight. And so I didn't know what to do, so I just called 911 and said, I think my son was in a car accident. Have you received any phone calls? And said that she was going to have me talk to a detective. And so I knew then that there was a problem.
Mukilteo Police Department open up a nearby church to use as a collection point for family members arriving at the scene.
We did have a site where we were letting the victims who had fled the scene meet up with their parents. And unfortunately, Jake Long's mom was there.
Walked into the church and just immediately surrounded by all of these women. And they had me sit down. The detective came up and she'd let me know that he had passed away and that he had been shot and that multiple kids were there and there were multiple fatalities.
Police soon learned that 19-year-old Anna Bowie was Alan Ivanov's ex-girlfriend.
We knew that Anna Bowie was the victim in the kitchen because the host of the party told us that she was obviously the target or the primary target of Ivanov.
Anna had been in a relationship with Alan Ivanov for nearly 2 years, but Ivanov had decided to break up with her earlier that summer. Police now learn about partygoer Will Kramer, who fled from the house after being shot and injured by Ivanov.
It was on by radio that there was a kid who actually got shot but was running into the street and got picked up by another officer who took him to the ambulance and they got him out of there.
Will Kramer's dad came to the door and I let him know that his son had been shot. The officer that was with me had seen his son and was able to tell him he was talking. He was being transported, but he was alive. And I wanted to make sure to get him to the hospital. He'd asked me to go contact his mother, which I also did that as well.
Alan Ivanov is transported back to Mukilteo by Washington State Police and handed over to the Mukilteo Police Department.
I wrote a search warrant to process Mr. Ivanov's body to see if there was any victim blood, any other evidence on him. And so I took hair clippings, I took all of his clothes, and I photographed him both clothed and unclothed. He was given a Tyvek suit and put in a holding cell until I could finish what's called the probable cause statement. So, Alan, you want to know what happened tonight?
want me to just start from the beginning?
Start from the beginning.
It was a long story. It was about a girl. And so what I did was I found a party that she was at. We recently broke up 2 months ago, but last week we started kind of talking again and seeing if there's any chance that we can get together. And it felt like she really wanted to, but what I saw at that party made me go back to my trunk and get that rifle without thinking.
John Ernst and I interviewed him for quite a while, did some processing of him, and then he was booked into jail by one of our patrol officers.
You hand him off to a booking officer. You take the probable cause statement to the desk at the jail. The booking officer then does the search and then gives him his jail clothes and a pair of flip-flops.
Investigators now begin building their case against Alan Ivanov, as the families of his victims are left to grieve for the senseless loss of their loved ones.
It was like 6 or 7 a.m. and we had to leave. The church needed to close. So the coroner came up to me and he handed me his business card and said, call me, later today about Jake's body. And I handed it back to him and I said, I don't need this because Jake's not dead. I knew it was like delusional, but that's like very final.
Mukilteo, Snohomish County, Washington. Police are investigating the mass shooting at a house party that has left 3 young people dead and another young person badly injured. The partygoers had previously attended Kamiak High School and were celebrating the end of their first year in college. One of the victims, 19-year-old Anna Bowie, has been harassed and stalked by her ex-boyfriend, 19-year-old Alan Ivanov, in the days leading up to the attack.
Mr. Ivanov went to Kamiak High School, which is the big high school in our city, which is where he met Anna Bowie. Most, if not all, the partygoers were also Kamiak kids.
Ivanov is identified as the shooter by the survivors who managed to escape his murderous rampage by hiding on the balcony of the house. Mukilteo police request assistance from outside agencies to help with an investigation on this scale.
We started with the Snohomish County Sheriff's Office Major Crimes Unit when it was determined by our chief at the time and Nicole and me that we had more on our plate than we could possibly handle initially.
Ivanov is arrested a few hours after the attack by Washington State Police and brought back to Mukilteo, where he is questioned by local police.
Detective Stone and I sat down with him and did an in-custody interview, and we talked about his relationship with Anna. Some of the things he said struck me as classic domestic violence talk. Things like it wasn't fair that she should be able to go on with her life in spite of the fact that he was the one that broke up with her.
We dated for a year and a half, and what happened was 2 months ago, without thinking, I just kind of broke up with her, and she went to Europe for like a month, and I went to New York with a friend.
Anna, prior to the murder, she had been in Europe for a month, traveling around and seeing things, living in youth hostels, and having the time of her life.
Interviews with Anna's closest friends reveal a darker side to her relationship with Ivanov.
He had threatened suicide multiple times during their relationship that she had to talk him out of. After they broke up, she blocked him on everything, but somehow he still saw some things that she would post on social media.
I started seeing her on Snapchat and seeing what she was doing, and saw her on snaps with other guys on their beds. The things that I saw were pretty hurtful.
She was with Will Kramer one night, and she had posted, pictures on her Snapchat story and stuff. Nothing bad, they were just hanging out, but he didn't like that. I think he had trust issues, and he was jealous of, her being away from him.
On Sunday, July 24th, 2016, 1 week before the fatal shootings, Alan Ivanov goes to a store and purchases a semi-automatic rifle and ammunition.
During the interview with Mr. Ivanov, he got into how easy it was for an 18-year-old to buy a rifle. He seemed to try to blame his behavior on how easy it was to buy a rifle.
In the days before the attack, Ivanov had reached out to Anna, hoping to rekindle their relationship.
She needed time to think, and that if they wanted to get back together, he needed to get rid of the gun, and he needed to seek mental health help. And he stated that, no amount of help would ever fix him. He posted it on several different forms of social media. He had just bought a gun recently, so I think that was why we were all kind of on edge about that. He was the type of person that needed to show that he had power, I guess. So I could see him buying a gun for that reason, just like he had bought the new car and stuff like that.
He tried to control her by being dramatic. There was a scene the day before the party where she had gone off with a friend, a female friend of hers, and he was jealous that she was spending time with somebody else, and so he called her and threatened to commit suicide.
In Ocean Shores on Thursday night, it had started out over text, but Alan was contemplating suicide. I wasn't really surprised, I guess, because it seemed to happen every time she was away. We called the suicide prevention hotline. Anna called Alan, and he was just sobbing on the phone, asking for her back.
I was pretty suicidal.
Okay.
But I knew I wasn't going to do anything. It was more just me to take some time, and that gun was just power.
During the course of their phone conversation, Anna tells Ivanov something he is not expecting to hear.
Anna had told Alan that she made out with another guy. She didn't say who, but when they were talking on the phone in Ocean Shores, he was really upset about that and he wanted to know who it was. But she didn't want to tell him because she was scared that he would hurt that person.
And then she had to go, so I hung up and I was just sitting there. I left 5 minutes later and I went home. She said she needed time, and I really understood that, but I just wanted to see what was going on in the meantime. I went to the party to just find out what was she doing and who was she hanging out with. And I know it's messed up, right? Stalking pretty much.
What was she doing that made you so upset?
She was just drinking and smoking and with other guys.
With other guys?
Even when she told me she really wanted to be back with me.
He tried to say at first he didn't want to do it, actually going to think about backing out. And then when he saw what she was doing at the table, talking to these guys, that enraged him.
The whole event was a burst of emotions. I had went out and bought a rifle for the purpose of shooting at a range. What I saw at that party made me go back to my trunk and get that rifle without thinking. I parked my car across the street pretty far, but I kind of found where all the cars were, and I saw the house, and I was just sitting there for a while, and I was just kind of listening.
He goes there, he identifies people that he wanted to be there to commit this heinous crime.
He went to a patio door on the back side of the house, which was right off where the breakfast nook was, and in the breakfast nook, there was Anna and some other party goers. They were playing a drinking game, which drove Ivanov crazy.
She was with some guy already, feeding him and stuff. And that's when I got really mad and I couldn't think properly. And then he went back out to his car. He had just purchased the rifle, didn't know how to use it. He hadn't taken it out of the box even. So he went through the owner's manual, figured out how to load a magazine, put the magazine in the rifle, and make it go. I walked across the street with my rifle, went to that same spot where I was sitting in, and I was just listening in, and I could hear them in the garage, playing beer pong or something. Just listening to their conversations, and after that I really didn't know what my intentions were. I kind of went through the forest to the back, hid behind there, and then I was near the front of the house. That's when the guy kind of unexpectedly walked in front of me, and I lost it. I was shocked. Jake Long got up, walked toward Ivanov without knowing that Ivanov was there. He was at the outdoor fireplace. He saw Ivanov with the gun. He turned, and Ivanov shot him in the back 3 times. He said, "Oh, no, my culture." And and after that I couldn't hear anything.
I thought your rifle was unsafe.
I flipped it to fire. Once he shot, there was no going back. And then some other guys by the patio thought it was fireworks or something, and I kind of ignored that, and that's it. And there was nothing else being said.
I was outside sitting by a fire with 3 other of my friends. All of a sudden, one of my friends, Jake Long, got up and walked over to the side of the house. I don't know what made him do that. I didn't even notice he did that until after I heard like 2 or 3 gunshots go off. I saw him hit the ground and yelled, but still, like, none of us had seen the shooter. It was really dark out at that point. We remained seated, but we were looking around because more, like, shots were going off. At this point, we weren't positive they were gunshots. At least I wasn't. But then, like, 1 gunshot later, I felt it on my shoulder, and I knew immediately that I had been hit. I just reacted and sprinted. I got up and jetted off of my chair and sprinted through his backyard and jumped over a pile of bushes. I didn't even feel the wound for quite a while. There, I called 911, and I didn't even look at my phone, or I thought he would see the light. So I just laid there, and I listened to my friends screaming as more gunshots went off.
When we heard it in the beginning, it was caught off guard, so we weren't looking for it, but then as we were paying more attention, I knew that the sound had come from above.
I started to hear people running and scrambling and stuff like that. My friend Alexis Gemmer came into the garage, and I opened the garage to try to run.
Tristan opened the garage door halfway, and he crawled under and ran to the end of the driveway and then looked back to look at me. Tristan's driveway, there's the road, and then it kind of goes up into a level area, and he was standing like right halfway in between like the rise. Like he was probably 5 feet up from the street.
And as I got to the bottom of the hill, I turned back to look at the house to see the shooter, the rifle, aiming at me.
I was crawling under, and then shots came from above us. I saw Tristan jump. He was like standing there, and then he started jumping, and then he looked up onto the deck, and then I ran in because I was scared.
As I saw that, I turned to run, got shot at, and then I tripped in the street and scrambled to get up, and I ran to my neighbor's house directly next to our house.
Was Alexis running with you out of the garage?
She stayed, and then when she saw that the neighbors opened their door, she came down and joined me.
What did you hear Tristan say about the shooter?
Just when he looked at me, he was just like, I think it was Alan, because they had talked about a couple days earlier, my friend had been threatened by him.
Alan Ivanov is charged with the murders of Jacob Long, Jordan Ebner, and Anna Bowie.
We charged Ivanov with aggravated first-degree murder. And in Washington state, there are only 2 penalties for aggravated first-degree murder: the death penalty and life in prison without the possibility of parole.
Investigators continue to build their case against Ivanov as the community of Mukilteo mourns the tragic deaths of 3 young people. Mukilteo, Washington, 2016. Investigators have arrested and charged 19-year-old Alan Ivanov with the murder of 3 young people at a house party in July of that year. Ivanov entered the property armed with a semi-automatic rifle and began randomly shooting at terrified partygoers, many of whom he knew from Kamiak High School. Under police interrogation, Ivanov claims that his motive was revenge against his ex-girlfriend, 19-year-old Anna Bowie. Anna was shot and killed while lying helplessly on the kitchen floor. The couple had been in a relationship for 2 years until Ivanov decided to end things at the beginning of that summer. He became enraged after his recent attempts to reconcile with Anna had been rejected just a few days before the attack.
This was probably the most critical event we've had in our city. I remember my squad trying to process the scene, trying to process the stuff that's going on.
At the high school, they wrote messages in the parking lot with sidewalk chalk, stuffed animals, candles, pictures, and it stayed there for quite some time.
I remember there was a candlelight visual. They had a big memorial at the Kamiak High School. that I basically went to like every single night I worked. It kind of felt good to be there.
The families of the 3 young people killed are left to mourn their loved ones who were taken from them at such a young age.
Jordan Ebner was well-liked among his friend group. He was somebody that, according to the people we talked to, everybody could talk to. You know, if you're having a problem, Jordan was the guy that you can call, right? He was well-loved. He was an older brother, and his brother looked up to him as kind of an idol or a hero. His loss was tragic, I think, for obviously his family, but also the community. Jake Long was a baseball prodigy. He became the starting catcher as a sophomore on a senior-laden team at Kamiak High School, which was a very good baseball team, and he became a leader on that team. And that was kind of his life, but he was another one who was well-loved and a leader among his friend group. His mom was completely shattered with his death.
He got to make such strong, close relationships, which he had with the kids that night. I think Jacob always wanted to have siblings, and that wasn't something that we were planning to do. Loved spending time with them. Lots of pictures of him holding the kids. Madison was 4 when he passed away, so her memories are very few, which I know is hard for her. But he was really close with William, my older son, who was 6 when he passed away.
Anna Bowie was somebody who was, from all accounts, universally loved. Everybody loved her. Everybody thought she was great. She was everybody's friend. She was vivacious and outgoing. She was a lover of music and a singer.
Investigators search Ivanov's phone and laptop for any evidence of premeditation before his shooting spree on the night of the party. Recent internet searches by Ivanov reveal a fascination with firearms and other recent mass shooting events.
He was Googling body counts of mass killers. He was Googling mass killer names. He was Googling how to do a mass killing, mass killings at a party. He'd found a song that was consistent with those Google searches. He was searching clothing that would assist him in hiding his identity and escaping from the scene. There was no doubt that he was planning to do this, and there was no doubt that he was planning to get away with it.
Further searches of Ivanov's cell phone reveal a troubling series of text conversations with a friend in the days leading up to the attack.
The friend was trying to talk him out of it just right up until the shooting. And I just remember one of the things he said to the friend is, you need to stay in your own lane.
Teens and young people, they say things and they act out and they do things, especially when they feel hurt and pain from a breakup or something like that. But I don't think anyone took it relatively seriously.
More disturbing evidence of Ivanov's lack of remorse emerges from an intercepted letter he tried to send from his prison cell to a former cellmate.
While Ivanov was in jail, he wrote some rap lyrics that he sent, which then got found out by the prison staff there. And it was just basically bragging about what he had done.
DOC searches all inmate mail. And so they intercepted this letter where he admitted to the murder and celebrated it. One of the rap lyrics that I thought was very telling was, AR-15, not a Dragunov, slide up at your party, call me Alan Ivanov. This was months after the shooting, and there was not the least little bit of remorse. And that was one of the reasons I thought that we might get to the death penalty in this case.
Prosecutors weigh up the mitigating factors in the case, including Ivanov's young age and lack of any previous criminal record. But his lack of remorse for the killings and his refusal to accept blame for his actions go against him.
Our elected prosecutor at the time would always bring in his senior prosecutor. He gave Detective Stone and I an opportunity to speak as to what we thought should happen to him. And then each of the prosecutors would get a say as to whether or not they thought that he should seek the death penalty.
I was very much opposed to life in prison without parole. I wanted him to have the death sentence. He gave that to my child. He gave that to the 3 children. And he made devastating impacts on the lives of the other children that were there that night.
There were aggravating factors in favor of the death penalty, the pre-planning, the number of victims, the fact that he had no remorse, but there were also mitigating factors, his age and his lack of criminal history.
Ivanov is scheduled to attend Everett District Court on Monday, December 19th, 2016.
The Friday before that, December 16th, my phone blew up with text messages and phone calls from the two prosecutors on this case, Adam Cornell and Lisa Paul. And so I called Adam, and he told me that Ivanov was going to enter a guilty plea to aggravated first-degree murder ×3.
When the prosecutor came to me and said, "We've decided to accept a plea deal," I was very angry. It was really explained to me that this is better because it gives closure.
Alan Ivanov pleads guilty to 3 counts of aggravated first-degree murder and 2 counts of attempted first-degree murder.
Mr. Ivanov did plead guilty to all of the charges on December 19th. And then in January, we reconvened at the courtroom, and all of the parents were there. And it was a very emotional time. Anna Bowie's father, speaking through a translator, broke down in tears. And Jake Long's mom brought Jake's ashes.
I brought Jacob's ashes with me because I wanted Alan to see Jacob. I think closure is important. I think for me, giving that impact statement was very, very important.
Ivanov addresses the families of his victims in the courtroom.
He got a chance to speak and said that Satan was in charge. Again, passing off the blame for his behavior to somebody or something else, and not taking responsibility for what it was that he did.
I believe the sense of rejection fed into this sense of entitlement that, how dare you not want me? If you're not going to be with me, you're not going to be with anyone, which is that young, immature love that you think that you fall into a relationship and that person you're with is your possession, and it's not the case.
He could have gone on to do good things for society, but chose to go the wrong way. Being that young and spending that many years in prison is also, I think, very well-serving.
With Ivanov now behind bars for the rest of his life, the community of Mukilteo tries to move on while commemorating the young lives lost on that tragic night in July 2016.
It was very interesting to see the community come together, but it was a wake-up call to our community as well that we're not immune to things that you see in the news.
We have a park now that's been dedicated to victims. A lot of people in the community knew these kids. It's been several years, but I think there's still an impact there.
These kids were with friends, all of them good kids that we've never dealt with, that we had no idea who they were. That someone walks into a party where they're all having fun and murders 3 of them in cold blood. That will be with me forever.
California, September 16th, 2003. Riverside Sheriff's Department received reports of a body in a pickup truck just outside the city of Paris.
I heard the call go out, a dead body in a vehicle in the area of Markham and Indian Avenue.
There were at least 35 stab wounds on the victim. It was overkill, and usually overkill is a personal thing.
The victim is 40-year-old construction worker Thomas Della Riva, who was last seen leaving for work with his teenage nephew, Hugo.
Hugo and Thomas left for work about 3:30 in the morning. The truck broke down, and Thomas stayed at the truck.
Police begin to question onlookers who have gathered at the scene.
And I'm thinking, who found this guy? And it's like, well, the wife found him. I just thought it was kind of strange.
Further investigation throws up more questions for detectives as they uncover a secret love triangle involving the victim.
I guess love does crazy things to people. And you throw in sex and it really, really makes them do some crazy things.
Jealousy can go a long way to help people commit crimes, even murder.
The city of Paris in Riverside County, California, is located 70 miles east of Los Angeles.
When I first started, it was still an agricultural area, basically. It was a lot of wheat and barley and livestock out here. But now it's hugely grown. It's a lot of industry, a lot of homes.
In 2003, Paris had a very high crime rate. Back then, it was kind of a corridor for drug trafficking coming up from Mexico and then throughout the United States. It's improved quite a bit since then.
Riverside at the time was like the Wild West. It was away from the major cities of Los Angeles, San Diego, Orange County.
Predominantly Hispanic and black at the time. As you go north into the county areas, then the white population is a little more dispersed.
On the morning of September 16th, 2003, officers from Riverside Sheriff's Department receive a 911 call. A body has been discovered on the outskirts of Paris.
They notified us around 8:30, 8:35. We got there maybe 20 minutes later.
I was actually driving into the office, and I got a call from the sergeant, said, hey, we have a homicide in the rural area of Paris. I need you to respond out there.
Officers arrive at the scene and find a crowd has already gathered.
I've been to a lot of homicides, and there was something different about this scene. When I got there, it was just a lot of people just close around where the body was. We need to get these people out of here.
It's an industrial complex. There's no real residences around there. It's all industrial buildings.
There was a red Dodge pickup truck parked behind the trees off the road, and that's where the body was located.
Directly across the street from it was a concrete manufacturing facility. Somebody from the concrete facility heard a woman screaming. Quite a few people from the concrete plant walked across the street, and they discovered that the victim was deceased in the truck.
Investigators move the crowd back and begin assessing the scene.
There would be a briefing once the homicide unit got there. All the facts that have been developed probably up to that point to give the homicide guys and girls something to go with, so they have an idea of what's going on.
And then from there, we got assignments. We had case agents and then a scene person.
I received a phone call from Riverside Sheriff Department. They were at the scene of a death and requested I respond.
You got to consider everything as evidence. You get pretty much one opportunity to go through and collect that evidence.
As we walked in and do our walkthrough, I saw a red truck on the side of the road. The door was open, and I saw a deceased male on the floor, covered in blood.
There was a body that looked like a Hispanic male with his head kind of at the passenger door area and his feet towards the driver's side or where the gas and foot pedals would be.
He was laying face down, knees up to his chest, on the floorboard of the vehicle.
There was a large amount of blood that was obviously visible, and it looked fresh, like it had just happened or fairly recently.
The victim is 40-year-old construction worker Thomas Della Riva.
We removed the clothing for protection so they could examine it closely later, and we did notice that there was considerable wounds on his back and front, face, neck, hands, torso. They located a knife and a cigarette lighter in the ground next to the driver's door of the truck.
We took our scene photographs and then we walked out of the scene and then said, okay, we need to start interviewing some people.
I assigned a deputy to take a digital camera and photograph every person that was anywhere near the crime scene. And then we also had them photograph the actual sole of their shoes because they had been walking around, so we could try to match shoe prints and shoe impressions from around the area of the truck.
Investigators quickly learn that some of the victims' close relatives are nearby.
Some of the family members, including the wife, were at the scene.
Since it was Spanish speaking, I was assigned to do the translation and do all the interviews in Spanish.
Our interviews, we always like to conduct them in a formal setting. And eventually they always do get to a formal setting, but it might be something as simple initially as a field interview, just to get some information.
Officers now learn that it was Tomas's wife, Maria de la Riva, and her sister, Sylvia Reyes, who discovered Tomas's truck that morning and made the 911 call.
And I asked Maria, what happened to your husband? And she said, well, he left and didn't come back, and I don't know what happened to him. Then, I went looking for him, and I found him.
Around 6 a.m., she and her sister, Sylvia, left for work, and she tells her sister that Thomas's truck had broken down when he left for work earlier that morning, and that she was concerned something had happened to him. They decided to go looking for him. Sometime between 7 and 8 a.m. that day, they find his truck, and they find Mr. De La Riva on his stomach on the floor of the truck. He had been stabbed 33 times.
It was the wife that was the one that was screaming that got the attention of the people from the concrete factory next door.
Detectives invite Maria and Sylvia back to the station for a formal interview, hoping to understand more about Tomas and his last known movements.
After her initial interview, I actually transported the wife of the victim back to our station, and she was interviewed by Detective Masson.
I said, are you involved in any way in the demise of your husband? And no, oh, okay. He went to work with Hugo, my nephew, through marriage. My husband usually takes him to work.
Tomas de la Riva's nephew Hugo traveled from Mexico to the United States 1 year earlier and was living with Tomas, his wife Maria, and their children.
Hugo eventually showed back up at the house, but without the victim. Hugo stated that the truck broke down and that his uncle was left there with the truck, and Hugo walked back to the house.
A short time later, Hugo returns home and informs Tomas's wife, Maria de la Riva, that their truck broke down and he needs water to fix it.
He came back, he said the car overheated, got 3 bottles of water, and he left. And then from there, he called and said, hey, I can't find him. Uncle Tomas is not there anymore, and he probably went to another family member's house, but I have to go to work. So he went off to a relative named Aaron, who took him to Orange County to work.
Hugo's boss is Maria de la Riva's brother, Aaron Reyes.
We knew that Hugo was the last person to see the victim alive.
Aaron and Hugo are together, and I said, well, they need to come back. We need to talk to him.
So we called Hugo's boss in Orange County and asked if Hugo would be willing to come back and meet with us.
Aaron drives Hugo back from Orange County to the police station in Paris.
I talked to Aaron before I talked to Hugo, and he's like, I brought him back, and he's waiting for you guys. We need to find out exactly what's going on here.
Officers hope that Hugo can assist them with their investigation.
I bring Hugo into the interview room and I ask him, what happened? And he goes, well, I woke up early. My uncle always takes me over to Aaron's house to drive off to work. And then what happened to that? He goes, well, we were driving to Aaron's house. The car overheated. Where did it overheat at? It overheated at Wilson. Would you be able to take us to there? It shows where, oh, sure, I'll take you guys. So at that time, we get in the car with Hugo, and he takes us down to the location. And he said, well, this is where the car overheated. There was some scuff marks where the tires like that. So that's all consistent with what he told us. And where do you think your uncle went after that? I don't know. What'd you do? He goes, well, I went home to get some water. Okay. And did you see anyone? Well, I saw my nephew Esteban, who eventually ended up giving me a ride back to Aaron's house to take me to work because we couldn't find my uncle. I said, okay. So we take him back to the station. We put him in the interview room now.
Hugo's uncle Aaron now reveals some important information to investigators.
Aaron comes up to me and says, hey, I just want to let you know, when we told him that his body was found, there was no reaction. There's something going on here. I'm like, okay. And he goes, also, I just want to let you know that Hugo and Maria were having some type of sexual relationship.
They were having an affair right underneath his uncle's eyes, and he was aware of the affair. It was no secret.
This startling new piece of information about Hugo's affair with his Aunt Maria gives police their first serious lead in their investigation into the brutal murder of Thomas de la Riva. September 16th, 2003, Riverside County, California. The bloodied body of construction worker Thomas de la Riva is discovered in his red pickup truck on the outskirts of the city of Perris. Thomas left his home earlier that morning to go to work with his nephew Hugo de la Riva, who was living with Thomas and his family at the time. Detectives have discovered Hugo has been having an affair with his Aunt Maria.
We found out that there was a secretive relationship that was going on the side behind the victim's back.
Talked to Hugo. I have no idea what happened to my uncle. Last time I saw him, he was alive, was waiting for me. He probably went to a relative's house. Well, what relative do you have around there? Well, I don't know. Maybe it was one of his relatives. Well, wouldn't one of his relatives be one of your relatives? Now he's getting a little frustrated. The answers he's giving me is not matching. He still sticks with the story. I have no idea.
The interview with Hugo is suddenly interrupted by an unexpected development.
After the initial interview with Maria, Detective Masson asked for somebody to sit in the room with her. While that officer was sitting in the room with her, she began to make some spontaneous statements. And so the officer came to me and I notified Detective Masson.
Maria wants to talk to you. She's saying that he came back and he raped her in a room.
Maria's serious accusation against Hugo changes the attitude of the investigators.
Like, sit down with Maria and tell me exactly what happened when he came home. Well, he came home, I was in my room, and he came in, he was completely naked. Did he have any blood on him or anything? Well, he was washing his clothes. How about his boots? And she's, well, he washed his boots outside.
But inconsistencies in Maria's story begin to raise doubts in the minds of the investigators.
She's all over the place. Her story just doesn't match. She's telling me details where the boots are. She's probably there, watching them. There's something going on. I asked her, do you think Hugo had something to do with the demise of your husband? And she says, I think he did. I said, well, why would you? Well, we've been having a sexual relationship for a long time. I said, I'm going to take you back, have you sit with your family. Please don't discuss anything with anyone.
Her story didn't appear to match kind of what was going on with the whole totality of the evidence that we had there, and things were just a little bit off.
From there, I go back into the interview room with Hugo. And I say, I think we have a little issue here. Have you been having a relationship with your aunt? And he kind of looks at me and says, well, yeah, we have. Why didn't you tell me that before? And he's like, well, I didn't think it was important. He starts kind of backpedaling a little bit. And I'm like, well, it is important. Honestly, I don't think what happened this morning is what you're telling me.
The tone of questioning now takes a dramatic turn in an attempt by investigators to find out what happened in the hours and days prior to the fatal attack on Thomas.
I'm letting him tell me a story because some of the story's true that he's telling me. Other parts, it's not. But, it's his story.
You want to kind of make him at ease, and then at some point you are going to transition into a serious interrogation and at some point get accusatory and try to elicit information with the facts that you've developed up to that point?
Eventually, I start breaking him down where I had to read him his Miranda rights. He waived his rights and wanted to talk to me.
Hugo tells investigators about the abusive and violent relationship between his uncle and aunt, and how it sparked the idea of murdering Thomas.
He came up with the story that, yes, they were having a sexual relationship. He hated his uncle because he would beat the kids and would beat Maria. He just didn't like that, and him and Maria got really close, and that's how they started the relationship. And, Maria wanted me to kill him.
There had been this plan or this scheme to murder her husband so that they could be together.
She'd get an argument with her husband, Tomas, and then she'd come back and tell him, let's kill him. And then, of course, Hugh would get all excited. They would have sex, and after sex, she would say, something, why don't we just hold off on that for another day? The cycle would start again. And this goes on for a long time.
Enraged by a feeling of helplessness, Hugo now makes a fateful decision that will change everyone's lives.
Hugo finally gets to the point where he's like, I'm just going to kill him. And she's like, well, if you're going to kill him, you do it. Keep me out of it. Don't get me involved. Well, I think it's a little too late for that.
Hugo explains to investigators the planning that went into killing his uncle.
Hugo told investigators that he had asked to borrow $1,500 from Maria, and that Thomas wouldn't notice that the money was gone, and that she gave him the money, and that he used this money to pay a guy named Armando to kill Thomas.
Even in today's world, the hiring of a hitman is very rare. And $1,500, even in 2003 money, that's pretty cheap.
He describes Armando. He says Armando's the one who stabbed him. He's the one that did everything, not me. I was there.
Hugo's in the front seat, and this Armando guy is in the back seat behind Thomas, who is driving. While they're driving, they stop on Wilson. Armando wraps a cord around Thomas's neck and strangles him and starts stabbing him.
Well, what's your uncle doing? My uncle's screaming out, Hugo, help me, Hugo, help me. Car comes to a stop. I get out of the truck, and I go around, but it's too late. My uncle's dead. And what do? Well, I just go home. He's describing how his uncle's being stabbed consisted of him stabbing his uncle.
Then Hugo tells the investigator, after he leaves and walks back home, Armando drives off in the vehicle with the victim.
Hugo's startling account of Thomas's murder stuns investigators, but more unexpected revelations quickly follow.
By that time, I'm getting pagers. I come out of the room. So I come out of the room, and they're like, hey, go talk to Maria again. She wants to tell you some more.
Suspicion now falls on Maria de la Riva and her role in the murder of her husband, Thomas.
I need to put Maria in an interview room because she's a suspect now. So I get her in an interview room, and I said, Maria, I need to read your rights. She waives her rights, and she tells me a story about, we've been in a relationship, but I do love my husband. We have kids together and the whole thing, but we just don't have a good relationship. And I confide in Hugo, and that's how our relationship started. So she tells me everything, the thing leading up to that morning.
Maria now gives a different version of events of what happened earlier that morning.
I woke him up to go to work, and the last thing I told Hugo was, don't do nothing to him. I don't want to get involved. She's minimizing a little bit, not probably telling us the truth, because she knew what was going on. She sends him off to work. She goes back to bed, knowing that her husband's going to get killed.
A short while later, Hugo returns to the house and wakes Maria.
He comes back, he's naked, and he jumps on top of me and takes my clothes off. What are you wearing? I said, well, I'm wearing my shorts. What happened after that? He just got up and called Esteban to take him over to Aaron's house.
Maria's clothing also raises the suspicions of the officers.
She's in a sweatsuit. I asked Maria, where's your shorts? You told me you were in shorts this morning. Well, I took them off after we made love. There's a big difference between sex and love.
More information about the troubled family dynamic emerges from an unlikely source. Maria's sister Sylvia now asks to speak to investigators.
I said, Sylvia, I was told that you want to talk to me. She goes, yeah, I think my sister and Hugo were involved in the death of her husband. I'm like, okay, well, what makes you think that? She said, they've been having an affair for a long time. I said, well, how do you know? She said, well, Maria told me. How about Tomas? Does he know? She goes, well, I was at a quinceañera, which is a Sweet 15 type party, and I confided to Tomas, and I said, hey, just to let you know, Hugo and Maria are having a sexual relationship. And Tomas says, I know. I know they've been having it, and I told them to break it off, but I'm afraid if they leave, the kids are going to leave, she's going to leave, and, I'm left here by myself. So I just kind of left it alone.
Investigators are getting closer to finding out what really happened earlier that morning to Thomas Della Riva, but many questions remain unanswered.
Once they told me the whole story, I went back to Hugo, and I said, okay, Hugo, we got some serious problems here. I don't think there's Armando. I think you're the one who probably stabbed your uncle to death. So he kind of breaks down a little bit. I hate him. He beat the kids, he beat her, and, but it wasn't me. I was there. It wasn't me.
Hugo now accuses Maria of paying for the murder of her husband, Thomas Della Riva.
She gave me $1,500, and we were planning to use that money to give to Armando to kill my uncle. Well, where's the money at? Well, my car got towed. It got impounded because I didn't have a license. I'm like, okay, you're telling me all this stuff, but did you give the money to Armando? I said, well, I approached Armando a long time ago, and he said, yes, I'll kill him, but it'll cost you $1,500. So I was giving him $50 here, $25 here, and I'm thinking, buddy, that doesn't make sense. Are we going to find Armando? Well, yes, you are.
Investigators must now find Armando and establish his role in the murder of Thomas Della Riva. Perris, Riverside County, California. 40-year-old construction worker Thomas Della Riva has been found murdered in his pickup truck by the side of the road. Detectives have uncovered an affair between his wife Maria and his teenage nephew Hugo. Hugo has admitted to planning his uncle's murder with a man called Armando.
Homicide detectives transported Hugo to a location where Hugo identified where Armando lived. We arrived out at that scene. One of the deputy district attorneys went with us. We froze the residence in anticipation of getting a warrant for it.
We talked to the roommate that lived in the trailer with him. Oh, he left a couple of days. I haven't seen him in a couple of days, so that's kind of strange. I'm thinking, wait a minute.
We actually asked all the people that were at the house whether they'd be willing to come back to the Perris station to be interviewed, which they did. Armando was not identified as a suspect in this case.
Armando could have been just another person. He probably just threw the name out there.
With Armando now firmly ruled out as a suspect, investigators choose an unusual tactic to try and unravel the web of lies being spun by Hugo and Maria.
I go back to Hugo, and I say, you're pointing a finger at her, she's pointing a finger at you. You probably need to talk to Maria. You probably need to kind of set this straight. I went to Maria and I said, Hugo wants to talk to you. You okay with that? She goes, yeah, I want to talk to him. I'm fine with that.
Maybe something's just not clicking. We'll put those two people together in a room, and they'll start talking, whispering, and that's being monitored.
I brought Hugo in and I said, Maria's sitting there. Hugo, I want you to sit over here. I don't want you guys walking towards each other. Please talk, but there's no touching.
And you're watching for just little things that are suspicious, and you use that information against them.
They start talking to each other. He tells Maria, why did you say everything? I was going to take the blame for it. And Maria's like, well, I told you not to do it. I told you not to get me involved. I told you not to do it. And they're talking details about the murder. Hugo, a couple times, got up and started walking towards her. Of course, I'm sitting there watching it. So I go in there and I kind of make it look like I'm not watching, because they don't know we're watching. Knock on the door. I go in and I'm like, I told you guys, I don't want you doing that. Getting close. I need you to sit here. I need you to sit over there. That's it. So I break them up and they start talking again. Hugo ended up wanting a hug from her, and obviously She didn't want nothing to do with him. That got close to the point we were able to break it up and put them back in their corners so they could talk again. And that went to the point where, okay, we got enough.
Investigators now believe they have enough evidence to arrest Hugo and Maria for the murder of Thomas Della Riva.
We told them, you're under arrest for the homicide of your husband, the homicide of your uncle.
You still have to corroborate that. You have to take your bits and pieces of evidence that you've developed, and you finally get to a point, it may not all be done, but you can see the picture, and you just take it from there.
I booked them into Robert Presley Detention Center, which is downtown Riverside. From there, they could have been moved anywhere within Riverside County.
With Hugo and Maria now in custody, investigators must gather all the evidence available to them to build the strongest possible case.
In Riverside County, when we have a homicide, we have a team of 5 people. You have a lead investigator, a case agent, you have someone who's going to process the scene, and then you have 2 extra investigators that will canvass or help process the scene also.
We had gone to Winchester for the original Armando search warrant. Then we also went to an address on Hennessy in the city of Paris, which is where Maria and the victim lived. Froze the location in anticipation of a search warrant.
I authored the search warrant. We went later on that day and processed the house with one of our forensic technicians.
Investigators conduct a detailed crime scene investigation of Thomas and Maria Della Riva's home to gather crucial evidence in the case.
I want to search Hugo's room. I want to search the room where apparently the rape occurred. I collected the shorts, the clothing in the washer, the boots that did have blood on them.
Another piece of evidence provides investigators with an insight into Hugo's mental state prior to the killing of his uncle.
Hugo had a drawing sketch of Maria on cardboard in his room.
Clearly, there was a lot of emotion, passion involved. She could have just said, hey, you're my nephew. I don't want nothing to do with you. Let's just break this off. This is not appropriate.
I think she played a critical role in it. Had it not been for her and her affair, the victim would probably be alive today.
Riverside County Coroner's Office now conducts a detailed autopsy of Thomas Della Riva's body as part of the investigation into his murder.
The deputy coroner, when he runs into a death of this nature, he carries that with him through other deaths and other situations. It both steadies himself and it gives him experience that say, hey, I saw this before. This happened in this case, and it matches exactly this case. We bring the body in, and the body's unclothed, photographed, washed front and back. If we need to, we do x-rays, provide those to the doctor doing the examination. Some start with the head, some start with the hands, but they examine everything.
The autopsy reveals the brutal injuries sustained by Thomas in the final moments of his life.
Generally, a report is maybe 1 or 2 pages. I think in this case, he wrote like 10 pages. There are several defensive marks on his hands where he tried to protect himself. Injuries to his back, injuries to his head, injuries to his face. At one point, there was a pressure put on his neck, and we saw those by petechia in his eye, which is a hemorrhage in his eyes from that particular movement.
The high number of stab wounds found on Thomas's body indicates a personal connection between him and his killer.
Whenever you have knives and cutting edges, it becomes very personal.
An angry person wants them to be hurt, and this is what he was doing. A killer would just hit you once in the heart and you're dead, but that's something that's personal.
To be able to conjure up the ability or the courage to actually strangle somebody and watch the life just kind of slowly slip away from them, that's pretty personable.
Detective Masson identified Hugo and Maria as the suspects in this case.
Hugo and Maria Della Riva are now formally charged with the murder of Thomas Della Riva.
Both of them were charged with 187 of California Penal Code, which is murder.
September 2003. Maria Della Riva and her nephew Hugo Della Riva have been charged with the murder of Maria's husband, Thomas.
Maria initially denied knowing anything about how her husband was killed and why and who did it. But later she recanted and admitted that she had been having an affair with Hugo and that he had told her he wanted to kill Thomas.
She went along with him. She, at times, would approach him and say, I want you to kill him. She would turn him on, turn him off, turn him off, turn him on, to the point where Hugo said, hey, you know something? I just need to take care of this and do away with him.
He wanted Maria for himself. Probably didn't like the fact that husband and wife were still living and sleeping together.
Under police questioning, Hugo accuses his friend Armando of killing his uncle Thomas.
Hugo tells the investigator that he and Thomas and this Armando guy get in the truck. And as they're driving, Hugo's in the front seat, Thomas is driving. This Armando guy is supposedly sitting in the rear seat behind the driver, behind Thomas. As they come to a stop on Wilson, Armando, according to Hugo, wraps a cord around Thomas's neck and strangles him and then starts stabbing him.
Hugo and Maria are both charged with the murder of Thomas Della Riva. They are detained and booked into the county jail while awaiting trial.
I did go see him one other time in the jail. We showed him a picture of Armando. We ended up identifying him. Is this him? He said, yeah, that's him. Okay, at least we have a identification of the guy.
But investigators quickly rule out this false lead and focus in on the real killers.
Armando was not ever a suspect.
To this day, I don't even know if they even found that guy. I don't even know if he was involved in that.
This inter-family crime of passion shocks a community familiar with violence and murder.
That relationship was going on for a long time. A lot of the family members knew that was going on. From what the family members told me during the investigation, Tomas knew that his wife was having a sexual relationship with the nephew.
But nobody could have predicted the shocking and deadly events this bizarre love affair would ultimately lead to.
People might think about doing certain things, but they don't carry through. And then there are those people that they think about it, they plan it, and then they carry through. They're willing to step over the edge. That's always a pretty crazy thing. How does one get to that level?
Family members knew the relationship was going on, but they didn't think it was going to go to that level of killing a family member.
The human heart can be a dangerous thing. You just never know in situations like this what can happen. Certainly the victim didn't know. And it does beg questions. Why would you continue associating with your nephew who's having an affair with your wife? You know about this.
Love is very strong, and he felt very strong about his wife and keeping the family together. At one time, Maria and Tomas probably did love each other. They had a good family, but over time, that deteriorated to the point where she relied on Hugo to comfort her, and that's how the relationship started.
Investigators continue building their case against Hugo and Maria Della Riva.
There's no doubt that Hugo was the guy who did the stabbing. Maria was not the actual person physically doing it, but this whole thing happened because of her relationship. She's the focal point.
Anytime you get a confession, it's good. I always liked not just having a confession, but have them reenact it. Tomas did reenact what happened in that cab of that truck. So I had a confession and I had a reenactment from him. Maria just confessed, and that was it.
She knew of the plan, and she was a part of that plan it, and helped try to cover it up initially, till all this evidence against him was exposed. There was really no more defending that they could do to protect themselves.
The district attorney makes the decision to hold a joint trial for Hugo and Maria.
Typical courtroom, you had one side of the family on one side, and then the other side you have the responding officers, myself, the interview, the forensic techs, the deputy coroner that went out there, a handful of witnesses, a couple family members that supports Hugo and Maria, and they keep them separated.
Prosecutors must establish a high degree of planning on the part of Hugo to ensure he faces the full force of the law.
Was the case premeditated? Clearly it was. Obviously, Hugo knew he was going to be getting his ride to work and had to pick a date and a time and a location where he ultimately committed the crime, and so that took a little bit of planning and preparation. Certainly did not appear to be anything that was spontaneous.
I don't think there were any signs or information where he was mistreated by his uncle or anything. When one is willing to murder a close family member that's always been good to you, I think that takes it to a whole different level.
The prosecution must also present a convincing case to the jury about Maria's involvement in the brutal murder of her husband, Thomas.
There were red flags from the very beginning. You just don't get that many homicides where the husband leaves to go to work and then somehow the wife shows up at the scene to discover this truck at a fairly remote location. How does she wind up there?
There's like an old saying that suspect returning to the crime scene, which happens frequently, and it's done in the hopes of maybe throwing off the investigation that, why would I show back up where my deceased husband's at? And this is one of those cases.
As the police, right, we have a threshold that we have to meet, which is the probable cause threshold to make these arrests. Obviously, the prosecution has a separate set that they need to evaluate the case with. Giving that much evidence that, hey, what have you told the police? What did you tell them? I think it kind of displays the level of guilt, right, and their participation in this crime.
The jury retires to deliberate the verdict in the case. They return to court and find both defendants guilty on all counts of the charges against them.
From the time the investigators picked up the case, the evidence led them right to the two suspects. They were both tried and convicted. It's about as strong a case of justice being served as we can expect under the circumstances and looking at the facts of the case.
When these cases are put together, they go to the district attorney and their chiefs. They have what's called a staffing, and they sit down and they discuss what is it that we can prove. Can we do the death penalty? Clearly, it was a first-degree murder, right? He could have been eligible for the death penalty.
Hugo de la Riva was sentenced to life without parole. Maria de la Riva was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison.
Maria just got 25 years to life. 25 years later, she would be eligible for parole.
For the de la Riva family, the pain and sadness of their loss will never heal.
It's sad. Family is left behind. Children are left behind. Without a father, without a mother. Knowing what happened, that, mother was having a sexual relationship with a nephew. And the nephew ended up killing dad. The kids are old enough now that they probably know what happened. They were old enough then.
It's very odd to have a nephew having an affair with a married woman and then ultimately killing the husband.
But many questions remain for those left behind. And could a crime like this have been avoided?
He wanted her, and it came down to jealousy that I want Maria. I had to get rid of my uncle to be with Maria.
They wanted something, and they were so desperate for it that they were willing to commit a murder to be together.
How he would think that would happen, how he would think in his mind that this is going to work out, that, his uncle's going to be out of the picture and he's just going to take the place of his uncle with her. That's for him to tell you.
The thorough investigation by the homicide team ensures justice is served in this case.
It's just being tenacious about your investigation to really dig into the stories that they're giving you, and does it make sense? And if it doesn't make sense, then okay, we'll figure out why. Whether that's follow-up interviews, whether that's matching the evidence that's at the scene to what they're telling you.
The thing that stands out most are the number and severity of the injuries. It was a crime of passion, basically. That was their ace card. There's more to it than this, yeah.
To me, it was just kind of like, I'm just doing my job. I want to get as much as possible in there, because at the end of the day, I don't want something to say, well, we didn't do this, or this wasn't done, or we didn't get enough evidence on her. She was a victim of this, and obviously she was not.
I'm sure that his family is appreciative that the people responsible for this are spending time in prison.
On the 4th of June 2008, in Mesa, Arizona, a disturbing scene awaits investigators. Travis Alexander, a well-known member of his community, is found dead in his home.
His roommates had not seen him for several days.
They thought something was wrong. They went to his house, found blood everywhere, and of course found Travis' body.
He's dead. He's in his bedroom, in the shower.
Okay, how did this happen? Do you have any idea?
No, we have no idea. Everyone's been wondering about him for a few days.
She said that there was blood. So is it coming from his head? Did he cut his head?
It's all over the place.
The crime is brutal. Multiple stab wounds, a slit throat, and signs of a fierce struggle. The nature of the attack suggests this was no ordinary crime.
When you walk into a homicide scene where there's 27 stab wounds and defensive wounds and a gunshot wound to the forehead, you know that there's rage and jealousy and some very intense emotion behind that action. That's personal.
As the investigation unfolds, detectives begin to piece together the last days of Travis's life. What they uncover is a story of a complicated relationship filled with passion, jealousy, and escalating tensions.
She wanted Travis. He broke up with her, so she says, I'm going to move states and be closer. And it just kind of was maybe a little bit of a foreshadow that she was going to go to extreme lengths to get what she wanted.
It's clear that this was something that was prompted by jealousy and rage and the narcissistic notion that if I can't have you, no one can.
This is the story of Travis Alexander, a case that would eventually capture national attention and reveal the darker side of love gone wrong.
Phoenix is the capital of Arizona, and until the arrival of air conditioning, Arizona was a very underpopulated place. But now it's been filled with all kinds of university people, tech people, young entrepreneurs. It's a big mix, it's a big city.
Mesa is the biggest city in the valley outside of Phoenix, and so there are a ton of people that live there. It's very populated, it's more than 1 million people.
As the years have gone on, there's been a lot of movement from the northern area to the west and Mesa. So it is an area where they do have crime, but your typical property crimes, certain crimes that affect people such as muggings and break-ins to cars and so forth.
Travis Alexander was born on the 18th of July 1976 in Southern California. Known for his strong faith, Travis was a dedicated Mormon and passionate about his career in sales and marketing.
Yeah, what's certain is we don't know what day is our final day here on this earth. But what is for certain is that tomorrow is one day closer.
Travis Alexander had a very rough go of it in an early life. He was one of many children. His parents were on drugs, and finally he ended up in the care of his grandparents.
Travis had a close-knit group of friends and family who described him as driven, outgoing, and full of life.
Religion was a centerpiece of his life, and he was very generous and giving in the community. He was a salesman, but he also drove a bus for elderly people and school children, so he was just a nice guy.
But in 2006, a new chapter in Travis's life begins, as he meets someone who would soon become a significant but complicated part of his world.
Travis and Jody Arias met in September of 2006 at a work conference in Las Vegas, Nevada.
Travis had an extra ticket to this work conference, and there were people in the company that said, "Hey, we're looking at this woman named Jody. She's cute. I think you'd like her. Would you want to give her your other ticket?"
Jody Arias was born on the 19th of July 1980 in Eureka, California.
Palm Desert is where Jody grew up. It's part of the Gulf corridor of the desert cities in the Coachella Valley, and it's a little hotter than Palm Springs. It has more golf courses than Palm Springs. There are a lot of service jobs there, but a nice community.
Many challenges mark her early life, including a troubled home environment.
Her parents were divorced when she was young, and she was left in the care of her mother, who struggled with addiction. Jody has said that she was sexually abused by her older brother and experienced emotional abuse from her mother.
She was very intelligent. She was a good kid. But when she became a teenager, she started to get a little bit more rebellious. And that's not uncommon for a teen, but her parents would eventually tell detectives that she was caught growing marijuana in her room as a teenager.
Jody had dreams of success, and while she tried her hand at various careers, she struggled to find stability. Despite these difficulties, those who knew her saw a determined and resourceful individual.
Jody dropped out of Wairika Union High School in the 11th grade and later attended college just for a brief period. She had worked as a waitress and a receptionist and a salesperson before starting her own business.
She had had some financial struggles in the past and saw Travis as this man, this bachelor who had it all together. He had a great job, he was financially stable, and so you put the two of them together and it was like fireworks at the beginning.
So here's Jody, a high school dropout, at this conference meeting this good-looking, dynamic man. She fell for him immediately. She said she loved his sense of humor. They did a lot of things together. They spent a lot of time together right off the bat.
Their relationship starts like many others, full of excitement and promise. But over time, it will become clear that something darker is at play.
At first, their relationship was a good one. They would do things together. They seemed to be in love with each other. But as time went on, people said that they could see how Jody was really trying to change Travis.
Even with technology, it's hard to maintain a long-distance relationship, but that's what they did. She was in California, he was in Arizona, but they met in California frequently. They talked a lot. They evidently sexted a lot. And this, of course, the basis of a very sexually intense relationship. And this went on for perhaps 5 months.
The two of them would have this long-distance relationship, and so they were meeting up at different places to basically spend time together and have sex.
Good Mormons are encouraged to keep journals, and Travis Alexander kept a blog, which I guess was a kind of journal about himself, what he aspired to be, what his childhood was, the obstacles he had to overcome, being very candid about it.
It was on that blog that he divulged and admitted that he had betrayed his faith and that he had crossed the line and had premarital sex.
The happiness and the kind of fantasy relationship that the two of them had lasted for a bit. But Travis had some inhibitions with the fact that Jody was not who he pictured as his wife. He wanted to lean into his religion. He wanted to lean into the Mormon faith. And so for him, she was not the person that he was going to marry. Jody wanted to be Travis's wife. So that became a bit of a strain in their relationship. And Travis knew that he probably needed to cut this off if he wanted to pursue a woman to marry who had morals and values like him.
To have the kind of relationship that Travis Alexander did with Jodi Arias, which was a very passionate and intensely sexual relationship, would naturally prey on the mind of anybody who thought of himself as a good practicing Mormon. And I think he believed himself that. He had a hand in getting her baptized into the church, but that still didn't change the nature of a premarital sexual relationship. And I think maybe in his mind there was always the sense that I can love this woman, but the relationship is wrong.
With Travis's death, investigators are on the verge of uncovering something far more sinister. What they soon will learn about Jodi Arias will leave them questioning everything they thought they knew about the case. With Travis's death, investigators are on the verge of uncovering something far more sinister. What they soon will learn about Jodi Arias will leave them questioning everything they thought they knew about the case. The investigation into Travis Alexander's death begins peeling back the layers of his relationship with 28-year-old Jodi Arias. As detectives uncover new details, what seems like a troubled romance starts to expose much darker intentions, ones that push the case into terrifying new territory. With each revelation, it becomes clear that this is more than just a passionate affair gone wrong, but the prelude to a deadly obsession.
Even though at the beginning the pair seemed to have the ideal relationship, what Travis likely didn't realize is that he was in the clutches of a true sociopath, a narcissist who would stop at nothing to manipulate and lie and do anything within her power to get him and keep him exactly where she wanted.
In a bizarre twist of events, they break up in their long-distance relationship, and then Jodi moves to Mesa, Arizona, to be closer to Travis. So it's one of those situations where Jodi had this manipulative, kind of controlling spell over Travis. And as much as he said, she's not the right woman for me long term, she seemed to just pull him back in every single time. And so they were still having this sexual relationship on the side, even though they had broken up.
Once Jodi moves to Arizona, she begins to exhibit the kind of behavior that, frankly, we associate with male stalkers and relationships that sometimes end with the "if I can't have you, nobody can."
Travis's friends told ABC's 2020 that they had noticed red flags with Jodi early on in the relationship. They said that they'd been alerted to Travis and his concerns, and that they had even grown concerned for his safety of things that had grown toxic and volatile between the two.
All of a sudden, Travis's tires were slashed. No one knew who did it, but they all suspected that it was Jodi.
Friends would eventually tell detectives that Jodi exhibited some odd behaviors, but they didn't think of it as overly concerning, maybe a little crazy, but they didn't think this little woman could do anything more than that.
His friends said Jodi would show up at his house unannounced and let herself in through the garage door because she knew the code.
At one point, he may have changed the code, or she couldn't get in the door, and she went in the doggy door. So it was clear that her obsession had reached a feverish level, and that she was going to immerse herself into Travis's life and his world come hell or high water.
Travis's friends are really getting worried about that, maybe more so than Travis, telling them, I guess, at one point, according to one account, that they're worried that he's going to end up in her freezer one of these days.
As detectives piece together the evidence, a complex narrative begins to emerge. The investigation focuses on those closest to Travis, examining their relationships, motives, and opportunities. Slowly, the pieces begin to fit together, revealing a story of intense emotions and a relationship that had taken a dark turn.
This kind of cycle went on for a little bit where Travis was living this kind of double life, but they were doing a lot of activities together. They'd go adventure together and things like that, but that only could last so long. So they eventually break up again.
And she leaves town. She moves back to California, to Wairika, where her family lives. And Travis thinks, well, that's done. That's all over. I don't have to worry about that anymore.
Travis is ecstatic. He's thrilled because he's finally rid of this baggage and the weight of having her in his life, even though they're not together.
They break up and Travis is relieved. You know, she's moved back to California. She's not going to be here to reel him back in again. And so he's telling friends, you know, I can really focus on our religion. I can go back to those values that I believe in and move forward that way.
Here's where Travis' self-reproach comes in, because it's not a clean break. He's still in touch with her. The sexuality of the relationship is still there. They're still in touch. They're still sexting, so having a sexual relationship virtually. And of course it troubles him. And even though he's telling his friends it's over, it isn't.
One of the hallmarks of a narcissist and a psychopath or sociopath is that they can be extremely jealous, especially when they have set their sights on one particular person, as Jody did with Travis. That becomes a problem because the person who is jealous really does not like anyone else interacting with or taking time and attention away from them. They have to be the focus of their object's attention.
Travis starts seeing other women, and Jody catches on that he is going to Cancun for their company trip. It's a trip that they do yearly. The company chooses a location, then they get to go. Jody was not invited by Travis on that trip. And I believe that's where this jealousy really hit a climax. Travis was actually going with another woman to that Cancun trip. And as soon as Jody realized it wasn't her, that's when she really spiraled mentally.
Despite her physical absence, Jody Arias' presence lingered. The lines between obsession and affection blurred, setting the scene for a dangerous love triangle. Travis's attempts to move on with his life would only fan the flames of Jody's growing jealousy.
Once Jody finds out about this relationship, it goes immediately to 11 on the dial of jealousy and anger. So here you have a kind of poisonous triangle with Lisa and Travis together, and Jody on the outside, furious, jealous, arguing by phone, presumably with both of them.
It was the complete dynamic that set the stage for this tragic event.
That really enraged Jody.
Travis' brother, Stephen, was quoted as saying that Jody was his kryptonite, the substance that could kill Superman. And whenever the final break came, it was so much for Jody that she was determined to get to Arizona as fast as possible.
Driven by jealousy and rejection, Jody Arias' thoughts turn dark. Her obsession with Travis takes a deadly turn, and a meticulous plan begins to form.
This is when Jody's plan starts to come to fruition. Jody actually goes to her ex-boyfriend's, and he gives her gas cans for a road trip. She was going to be driving from California to Utah to actually visit another man. And you're thinking, why would you need gas cans? There are so many gas stations on the way from California to Utah. Well, because she decided to stop in Arizona and pay a visit to Travis, she did not want any record that she was getting gas transactionally, or if surveillance cameras got her, that she was ever in Arizona. She bought gas in California, she bought gas in Utah when she made it there, but in Arizona, she used the gas cans.
Here's Jody on her headlong drive to get to Arizona, to get to Travis.
She comes in, and these two have a crazy hours-long sex session, if you will. They're filming it, they're taking pictures of it. I mean, this is a whole rendezvous for the two of them.
So it seems that whatever his sense was, that maybe if I have sex with her one last time, she'll go away, leave it amicably and leave it alone, that was not what Jody had in mind.
A final encounter between Jodi Arias and Travis leads to a brutal crime scene, leaving investigators with more questions than answers about what really happened that night.
Because Travis traveled so much, his friends thought he was on the road, probably for work. He had missed an important call, but beyond that, there seemed to be no grounds for suspicion. But after 5 days, they thought something was wrong. They went to his house, they got in, they got a key to the master suite, found blood everywhere, and of course found Travis' body, which evidently was very grotesquely propped up in the shower.
The jealousy that prompted the murder itself was the fact that after he broke up with Jodi, Travis met another woman at work and they began dating. And they had plans to go to Mexico together.
The crime scene was gruesome. Travis had sustained 27 stab wounds, a slashed throat, and a single gunshot wound to the forehead.
This was intentional. It was intimate. It was filled with rage. I mean, it is so personal to stab somebody, as is, but to stab somebody 27 times and to slit their throat and then shoot them, that's somebody with the ultimate rage. And in Jodi's case, the ultimate jealousy.
The friends, of course, called 911. Police showed up, and they asked the friends, gee, was he suicidal? Or was there anyone you know who was angry with him? And the first, maybe the only name they mentioned was Jodi Arias' name.
Oh my God. 911 emergency?
Hi, this is AJ with the transfers. She's calling from one. Ma'am, is that correct?
Yes. Okay, that's one in Mesa? Yes. Okay, what's going on? What? What's going on?
A friend of ours is dead in his bedroom. We hadn't heard from him for a while. We think he's dead. His roommate just went in there and said there's lots of blood. I didn't go in, but I can give you the phone to someone who went in there.
Yes, please, can you?
Hello.
Hi, so what's going on?
He's dead. He's in his bedroom.
Okay.
In the shower.
Okay, how did this happen? Do you have any idea?
No, we have no idea. Everyone's been wondering about him for a few days.
She said that there was blood. So is it coming from his head? Did he cut his head?
It's all over the place.
Hold on just a moment. Okay, you're a good friend of Travis's, correct?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
Yeah.
Has he been depressed at all? Thinking about committing suicide? Anything like that?
I don't think he's been thinking he committed suicide. He's been really depressed because he broke up with this girl, and he was all upset about that. But I don't think he would actually kill himself over that.
Has he been threatened by anyone recently?
Yes, he has. Okay. He has an ex-girlfriend that's been bothering him and following him and slashing tires and things like that.
And do you know the ex-girlfriend's name?
Do you remember it? Yeah. What's his ex-girlfriend's name? Ask Taylor. Her name is Jodi.
What happens after they place the 911 call is typical of what would happen in any homicide scene or call. You would have the police arrive, cordon off the crime scene to protect the scene itself from contamination and destruction of evidence. Obviously, when they got into the bathroom, with 27 stab wounds and one gunshot wound to the forehead, it's a very bloody scene. So the likelihood of finding some sort of DNA or fingerprint evidence is very high.
Travis's death sends shockwaves through his community. The brutality of the crime, combined with the seeming normalcy of his life, make it all the more unsettling. On June the 9th, 2008, a group of concerned friends make a shocking discovery that will change their lives forever. After days of not hearing from Travis Alexander, they decide to check on him at his home in Mesa, Arizona. When they arrive, they're met with a horrifying sight.
Travis is dead in the shower. He won't be found for several days. In the meantime, Jody takes her rental car, drives to Salt Lake, where she meets up with a man that she had been seeing, who notices that she looks very different. Her hair is no longer blonde. It is no longer long. She's dyed it brown, and she has lots of cuts on her hands. She turns in, ultimately, the car that she had rented for this journey with something nearly 3,000 miles on it, and the clerk noticed red stains in the car, which were never tested because the car was cleaned before there was any need to examine this car, any reason to examine this car. So Jody's on her way. She's tried to perhaps cover her tracks by placing several phone calls to Travis' phone as if, Travis, where are you? What's the matter with you? Are you okay? To make people think that she thinks that Travis is still alive.
They don't immediately look at Jody. In fact, Jody actually calls police and says, hey, I was a close friend of Travis's. I'm happy to help. It wasn't until some of Travis's friends brought up the fact that they believed Jody could have killed Travis that police started looking into her. And she would come down and they would do these interviews with her, and she'd almost turn on that flirtatious charm with them, laughing, things like that. And, they had to present her evidence as they gathered it, but it was hard because she did not seem concerned for what was going on. She would answer their questions, kind of even laugh with them, but she never at one point really stopped and was like, oh my gosh, they're about to arrest me for murder.
I don't think you would admit to it if your own mother saw you do this and she told me, yeah, I saw her do this. You would say, no, it wasn't me. Why won't you admit to it?
I just can't. I didn't kill Travis. I just didn't. I did not take his life.
Did you have anything to do with the death of Travis?
I don't think I had anything directly to do with it, but I feel responsible somewhat for it.
Despite her initial cooperation and seemingly innocent demeanor, police begin to uncover a different story. One marked by jealousy, manipulation, and a calculated effort to cover her tracks.
When you have a bloody crime scene, you generally have an abundance of evidence. The key is to preserve that evidence and collect it properly, which is what the police did.
A bloody palm print was discovered along the wall in the bathroom hallway. It contained DNA from both Jody and Travis.
That tied her directly to the crime scene.
Perhaps the most significant piece of evidence that framed the nature of the crime as well as the time was that Travis had just bought a digital camera, and police found it in the washing machine. There was evidently an attempt to destroy it, and with good reason.
Jody has a digital camera with them during this, and there's evidence of the two of them in sexual positions in pictures that they're taking of each other. She's taking pictures of him posing in the shower, different things like that. And the unique thing about this camera is it has the date and the time stamp.
The evidence against Jodi Arias is overwhelming. From a bloody palm print to a digital camera hidden in the washing machine, it all paints a chilling picture of premeditated brutality. The once blurry lines between victim and perpetrator become undeniably clear.
When they were able to recover images from it, they found from that afternoon of June 4th pictures of Travis and Jody in sexually suggestive poses, which does lend itself to the theory that he was having consensual sex, make-up sex, or break-up sex, but also inadvertently about 5:30 that same day, so you have a span of several hours of physical encounter, a photo accidentally taken of his body, his murdered body. So the camera spoke for him from his own grave.
I can't imagine that anyone would photograph the evidence of a brutal murder and then not take that evidence, in this case the camera, either the film or the digital images, with them. That just is almost preposterous, except that maybe she knew nothing about police procedure and just didn't realize that they were going to check everything, every inch of that home. But it really is unusual for someone to purposefully leave something like that at a crime scene.
On the 9th of July, 2008, Jody was indicted by a grand jury in Maricopa County, Arizona for the first-degree murder of Travis. She was arrested at her home 6 days later in California and was extradited back to Arizona on the 5th of September. Jody pleaded not guilty on September 11th.
Jodi Arias changed her story 3 different times. At first, she told investigators she was never there. She wasn't in Travis's apartment. She was never in Arizona at all. Then, as they started to present her with this evidence, well, your hair was found at the scene. There was blood all over the bedroom, blood in the bathroom, and now we have this digital camera that shows you were there. This is you in the pictures. How do you explain yourself? Then she changed her story to there were masked intruders that came into the home. They killed Travis. They threatened to kill her. She hid in the closet. And then eventually, as this went on, and detectives said, your story is so far-fetched, there's no way this is true. So eventually, she then concedes and says, well, I did stab him, but it was in self-defense. Travis was abusive and I had to protect myself, and he kind of looked at me as like a prostitute, and so he abused me in this way, and I had no other option but to defend myself in that situation.
On July the 9th, 2008, Jodi Arias is indicted for the first-degree murder of Travis. Her arrest marks the beginning of a legal battle that will captivate the nation, in which Jodi will continue to weave an intricate web of lies in an attempt to escape justice.
Police knew very well that Jodi had been in Arizona since March of 2008. They knew very well from the camera evidence that there was no intruder, no other evidence of an intruder. But her claim about domestic abuse, that she was being abused by Travis, is the one that her attorneys would pick up and take into the courtroom in her murder trial.
In this day that we live in, it's really a fascinating thing, because the way criminal trials were reported 30 years ago was very different. And then court TV came along, and you could bring cameras inside the courtroom, and then they devoted a whole 24-hour channel to televised trials, which really changed things for the American public.
This is a trial unlike anything I've really seen. You had people flying in from around the country just to be here to sit in the gallery to watch this trial. And I think it had these elements that not every case has. First off, you have an alleged female killer. It's all surrounding jealousy and rage and a relationship gone wrong. You have a Mormon man who was living a double life, having this crazy sexual relationship with this woman who was manipulative and controlling and had this kind of fantasy he wanted. And then you have this brutal killing that goes far beyond just a quick gunshot wound or one stab wound. I mean, this was something that was so heinous that I think people thought, how could this woman we're looking at, that's small and petite, do something like that?
Suddenly, it's a national, even an international sensation. The trial judge, did not want to televise this, but was overruled. And so the Jodi Arias case was on television. But that wasn't enough. People flew in from all over the world to stand in line to wait to sit in that courtroom.
The trial of Jodi Arias unfolds with much spectacle and intrigue. As the courtroom drama plays out, the public watches in disbelief as Jodi Arias takes the stand, spinning tales of self-defense and abuse. But the prosecution's evidence and the testimony from those who knew Travis paint a starkly different reality.
The case itself was one of those really sensational moments in the American justice system, like the O.J. Simpson trial, akin to some of the other high-profile trials that have happened in the last 25 years that have been televised. It's brought it into everybody's living rooms and into their lives.
The media spectacle raised questions on the impact of such coverage on the fairness of the trial process and potential influence to the jurors' perceptions. The explicit and graphic nature of the evidence presented, including crime scene photo and autopsy photos, led to debates on the appropriateness of broadcasting such materials.
Throughout the trial, the public watch as a web of lies, manipulation, and deceit is unraveled, exposing the events that led to Travis's tragic end.
She spent 18 days in the witness stand. Unprecedented, her lawyer said, unheard of. And of course, that long on the witness stand is a means of unraveling alibis and statements as well.
Defense attorneys don't want their clients to ruin the case for them. And you're running the risk of that liability if they go and take the stand, because you don't know exactly what they're going to say. But Jodi was full of odd and maybe unexpected moves. Even when she was arrested for first-degree murder, she sat in the interrogation room and started doing headstands and yoga, and then started singing to herself, and then asked if she could touch up her makeup before taking her mugshot. He knows our needs. He'll be angel voices. That is completely unusual. And so to think she would testify in her own capital murder case, honestly, wasn't that surprising given what we knew about Jodi Arias.
Her demeanor on the stand was very different from the behavior that Travis' friends had seen, this sexually aggressive, outgoing, lively person. She wore a pair of glasses, which, as we know, often happens with defense attorneys, putting glasses on defendants to make them look studious or younger or more serious about it. She came off as more timid than you would have expected, but maybe this was part of the presentation of the defense as her as a victim of domestic violence at Travis Alexander's hands.
So the defense had a hard time proving a self-defense claim, because even if it was self-defense at first, the reality is 27 stab wounds and shooting somebody in the head after that is overkill. That's beyond self-defense. And there was really no way for them to say that was enough or needed to protect herself.
Prosecution presented time-stamped photos from Travis's own digital camera, including pictures of Alexander in the shower moments before his death, and images accidentally taken during the attack, pointing towards Jodi's presence at the scene.
That basically eliminated her alibi, or her theory that she wasn't there, that she was telling them she wasn't there, and it concretely tied her to the scene, along with other evidence.
The prosecution had this kind of high burden of proof to show that this was premeditated, because by all accounts it seemed like it could have been a heat of the moment passion, and she could have gone there just to have sex with him. But the problem is that she was living with other family members at the time in California, and conveniently a gun went missing from their home that Jodi was staying at in the week before Travis was killed. The casings of that gun matched the casings that were at the Travis Alexander crime scene.
There was no evidence of other people, of intruders in the house. Another element of the prosecution's case were the texts and emails showing evidence of Jodi's jealous nature, hundreds of text messages, thousands of emails, which were finally turned over to the defense by the prosecution. All of this building brick by brick the case that the prosecution was putting on, that this was a jealous woman, that this was a premeditated revenge murder of the man who had spurned her.
In 2013, after years of investigation and a highly publicized trial, the truth about what happened to Travis Alexander finally comes to light. The evidence is overwhelming, and the jury delivers a verdict that brings some measure of justice for Travis's family and friends.
The prosecution said, we're going to go for the death penalty here. And so I think people wanted to know, was this woman that they were looking at, that they really couldn't picture doing this, going to be convicted of first-degree murder and possibly sentenced to die?
In Arizona, as in many states in the United States, if there's a possibility of someone being sentenced to death, once you're convicted, then there's a separate trial with the same jury to decide whether you're going to be sentenced to death or sentenced to life in prison under certain conditions. And Jody had told a television reporter with some bravado, I guess, early on that, well, yes, please just put me to death. But in court, she said, really, I understand that was not me. I really would like to get a life sentence. I can do something with my life. She mentioned the fact that she had donated her hair to a charity that provides hair for children with cancer so they can make wigs for them, that she could make and sell things in prison, that she intended to donate the proceeds to victims of domestic violence. So you had the same jury that convicted her sitting in judgment on whether or not to send her to death row.
Days later, the jury comes back and says, we have a verdict. The judge reads that verdict and says, Jodi Arias is guilty of first-degree murder. And you could see the look on her face in the courtroom. She did not expect to be convicted of that. Maybe second-degree murder, maybe manslaughter, but she definitely thought she got away and would not be found guilty of first-degree murder. You could see it on her face. She looked upset. She looked a bit bewildered, kind of looking at the jury. So she was found guilty of first-degree murder, but then you had to enter the sentencing phase, which happened a couple months later. And during that penalty phase is when Travis's family spoke. His sister spoke about losing this kind of rock of their family. And this was going to be a tough feat. Does the jury decide to put Jodi Arias to death? They deliberated and came back hung. They could not decide on a verdict for sentencing. That meant they had to do the entire sentencing portion of this trial again. So they came back months and months later, and this jury comes back hung again. Mistrial again in the sentencing phase. The thing about Arizona is after the jury is hung twice on a death penalty case, that's it for the prosecution. You don't have a third try for death. And so eventually the judge sentenced Jodi Arias to natural life in prison without the possibility of parole.
After years of legal wrangling, Jodi Arias is found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life without parole. Though justice is served, the scars left by this case linger, both in the lives of those who loved Travis and in the public consciousness. As a result, Jodi Arias becomes a symbol of how far a person can go when driven by obsession and jealousy.
I think one of the biggest reasons people kill other people is because of jealousy and rage. And it happens more often than people really think. When there's jealousy and there's rage, especially if there's another person involved, someone's going to get hurt.
I think we've all seen combustible relationships. And sometimes we try to intervene, sometimes we think if we do, it's only going to get worse. Travis' friends tried to intervene, and it didn't seem to stop it. He was dating women, but still having a sexual attraction and relationship to Jodi, which ended up being a fatal attraction. He could not, as the phrase goes, quit her, and she certainly wasn't going to give him up to anybody else, even at the cost of his life and ultimately at the cost of hers behind bars.
I think the Jodi Arias case just had all of the scintillating elements to make it super sensational. You have the aspect that it was a case of jealousy and rage. You have control and intimidation in a way. You have the aspect of a person who has a very high moral code, yet the girlfriend was able to break that moral code. So that's an intriguing aspect of it too. And then, of course, the fact that it was so bloody and so violent, unfortunately, is a sensationalistic part of many of these cases, and that those elements combined, those ingredients just seem to be what the public wants to read about and watch if it's televised.
The impact of this case is felt beyond the courtroom, leaving a lasting mark on everyone involved and raising questions about the destructive power of jealousy and obsession. Though the community as a whole is rocked by the loss of Travis Alexander, the true cost of this tragedy will be paid most heavily by the people closest to him.